Good morning, everyone. I don't know about you, but I've been blessed already. That song, and indeed all the music, and the children's story, and the prayers, and we have had such a rich filling today, haven't we? And we can really thank God for that. I especially want to thank all the children's leaders who helped our children today to bring forth an incredible presentation of what God is doing in their lives. And this is something that we need to give credit to those parents and teachers who are working behind the scenes, and just to say an enormous thank you. Because that is why many of us are here, because we want to pass on to our children the rich treasures of faith that we've received ourselves. And so we thank you for what you are doing and for being here. Indeed, my heart is overflowing with gratitude. This morning, we had a stewardship promotion. And out of that, we learned that we give out of the love that God has given to us. Isn't that right? And the South England Conference, I know, is just really, really grateful and wants to say thank you for your generosity, for your sacrifice, for your decision to put God first in every area of your life. We are blessed, and we thank you. We thank God today for our families. We thank God as well for our church family. And this church, in the past, about almost 20 years ago, gave birth. Do you know that? Churches can give birth. And there was a daughter church called Luton North. And as is usual with children-family relations, things have not always gone as smoothly as you like, but there is love there. And I know there is love from Luton Central for Luton North and vice versa. And I'd like to invite you to a special event that's happening next Sunday afternoon, the 9th of July. It's going to be a social event, a fundraising event that will be on Lucy Park. We all know where that is, and you're very welcome to go along between 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, and hopefully you'll see that event promoted. And the purpose is to have lots of fun, socializing together, and incidentally, some of you know that they are praying, and they'd like to invite your prayers for a bid that they are hoping to put in for a church building. And God is moving so far, and I'd like you to pray for their business meeting on Monday night, that God will guide them in that process, as well as those that are receiving the bids eventually in the middle of the month. You see, this month I've been looking forward to for a long time. I'm going north. For those of you who know me, we lived, Karen and I, in Scotland for 7 years. And this time, as part of our annual leave, we're taking the next 2 weeks off. We're going up to Crieff. Karen's going to be preaching there. And then we're going to be going on to discover more about the early Christian experience in this country. But more about that later. Indeed, today, we're talking about honest prayer, about how that song that we've just sang, where we are asking God to bless us, can be put into practice. And because we've had such a full service today, I'm hoping and praying that we'll be finished by 1 o'clock, and some of you will say, Amen. Let's bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, we are so glad for your word that inspires us and teaches us about how we can follow you and experience this amazing blessing you want to give in our lives. And so, Father, today, make us teachable. Open our hearts to your Spirit. May we not hear people, words, but may we hear your Spirit speaking about what we need to do in order to be able to glorify you more. Indeed, that our prayers will be truly honest. In Jesus' name. Amen. In that scripture reading that was beautifully read, so aren't our children good at reading? Oh, it's just a blessing today. We went to 2 Chronicles chapter 7, and please go there with me to verse 14, a passage that you may have heard before, that you may have heard sung about, but it's a passage that teaches us something very, very important. It's a passage where Solomon is hearing what God is saying at a time when everything is going well. Now, this is really hard for us, because for most of us, when things are going nicely, when we've got something that we want to thank God for, we think, okay, praise the Lord, and everything's going fine. And spiritually, we tend to take our faith and our community and our beliefs and our inheritance for granted. But on this special day, where Solomon was part of this super service that was sacrificing so many sacrifices and calling together all of the best musicians and worship leaders and everybody you can imagine in Israel at the time to celebrate the fact that God had helped them to build a temple. No more were they going to be stuck having to go out to this flimsy tabernacle that was made for a relatively small number of people. Now, the Israelites were going to have a glorious temple that was one of the most magnificent sights that those people had ever seen. And yes, they wanted to praise God. But in Chronicles, as opposed to the account in Kings, Solomon is called by God to give them a warning. And he says that when I shut up heaven, in verse 13, 2 Chronicles 7 verse 13, when I shut up heaven and there is no rain, or command the locusts to devour the land, or send pestilence among this people. And friends, haven't we experienced pestilence over the last few years? Haven't we experienced in some ways God closing the windows of heaven? Haven't we personally in our lives experienced pain and suffering from illness, from the tragedy of losing those that we love? Haven't there been locusts that have devoured what we want? I just had a call from someone to say, Pastor, I've been swindled, I've been scammed. Can you do anything to help me? Brothers and sisters, the locusts are eating up our resources, and it seems as though there is at times no rain. And we are wondering what to do. We here in Luton Central are blessed with this lovely building that was purchased over 60 years ago, with a lot of sacrifice. But we are finding that it is limiting in that we've got so many children and we want to be able to have places where they can be ministered to with their Sabbath School and other events. And we had a business meeting a while ago that said, we need to find a better place. And a better place only comes when, like David and Solomon, we have a vision of what God is wanting to do, something bigger and better that requires incredible sacrifice. And he says, if my people who are called by my name, that is you, Luton Central, you visitors, you who are joining us here for the first time, you who are established here, who are called by the name of God. What an honor that is, to be called by the name of God. God is righteous. God is good. And Luton Central. And all those on YouTube out there and on Zoom that are watching today, God is calling you by his name. You are precious to him. And he says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves. Ouch. Do we like to be humbled? What do we think humility would mean? Humility is something that in our community, in our media, that we very rarely hit the headlines and talk about. Is that right? It is not a value that the world appreciates. But God says, if you are to humbly, honestly pray, it is the first thing that we need to do. And how do we humble ourselves? We pray and seek his face. Now, you've heard us pray. We had a beautiful prayer this morning. We have lovely prayers as part of our community time. If you haven't been part of the Luton Central and Luton North worship and prayer times, please check in, as was advertised today. There's amazing prayer ministries that take place in this church. Indeed, if there's anything good that's happening in this church, it's because of our praying communities, and we praise God for them. But the purpose of our prayer time is to seek the very face of God. This morning, brothers and sisters, have you seen the face of God? Some of you may have wondered, what does that mean? For me personally, seeking the face of God happens in quiet times. When I am alone with God, perhaps in nature, perhaps in my worship space, and I am just quietly reflecting on the Word of God that describes his character, and I seek his face, like in some of the songs that we have sung this morning, where we see Christ and what he did on Calvary. And as we see his face, we see that he wants to connect with us, eyeball to eyeball. You know, it's like some of us are a bit shy, and we don't like actually looking into other people's eyes. We'll look down, and that's fine. God's made some of us introverts, and my wife is a big introvert, and I always used to try and change her, and then discovered that actually it was me that needed changing. Because extroverts need to recognize that introverts are God's gifts to this world as well as extroverts, all right? So he's given us all different gifts. But what God is saying is that no matter what personality you have, God's face is open for you. And yes, we may come as Moses did, before God and take off our sandals and bow at his feet because there is a flame that we don't understand. But if we do, he wants to show us his face and reveal the fact that he loves each one of us, no matter what we have done. And for some of you, that's hard to take in, because we're always trying to make atonement for what we have done. But when we seek the face of God and turn, and this is the critical turning point in this passage, it says that as we seek God's face, we need to turn from our wicked ways. Now, some of you will say, well, I don't think I've been too wicked this week. There were some murders out there. No, I didn't murder someone. There was some drug taking on the street, and I know some of the young people have been sharing porn and that sort of thing. No, I haven't done any of that. I'm not one of those wicked people. But my friends, if the truth be told, there are inclinations toward wickedness in each one of our hearts. When we have not turned to somebody else in generosity and love, but criticize them, is that wickedness manifest? When we have backbitten, when we have given motives to other people that are not the best, is that wickedness? When we've run down our spouse and tried to belittle our children, is that not wickedness? And my friends, God calls us to turn from our wicked ways. But how do we do it? Some of you have struggled with some of those besetting habits. Some of you may have realize that you're actually addicted to some of those ways of doing things. And addictions, we like to think of them as, smoking and drinking, and we wouldn't do any of that sort of thing. But the fact is that many of us are addicted to other things, and I could start to list them, but it's up to the Spirit to just note in your life, as He has in mine, that if I'm not spiritually seeking the face of God, my addictions will overtake me. And they are addictions that take me away from His face. Addictions that will often make me depend on me rather than on the God that I love. And those addictions, we often criticize and tell someone else, you've got to quit that porn watching. You've got to stop watching TV. You've got to cut back on your social media. Cut it out. Whatever the addiction is, the overeating, the overworking, we even have good addictions, don't we? That we justify. But the fact is that they're still addictions. And the secret that we need to discover today is, what are those addictions hiding? We need to stop attacking and pointing the finger to other people who don't have the same addictions as ourselves. All right? We like to criticize others because we've overcome in those areas, but the fact is often we're struggling ourselves. And we need to recognize that the tip of the iceberg might be visible, but that's not the main issue. And so to humble ourselves means to give up on trying to sort out the negative things, these critical, horrible things that we do in our lives. And I just want to share with you something that I found very helpful. And that is that if God is leading you in your life to want to turn from your wicked ways in the broadest sense of the word, and you've struggled and you've tried and you've overcome in some areas, but other areas you're really, really struggling, and you've been struggling for more than 6 months, for more than 12 months, and it seems as though you come to God and say, God, I give up. I thought I'd overcome that, and boy, shoof, straight down the slide again as soon as the opportunity arises, and I give way. And I tell you, God never meant you to overcome all your besetting sins by yourself. He has called you to be part of a family, to learn how to pray together, not just superficially, but deeply together, where we learn to trust each other. And if you don't find there's anyone around here in Luton that you can trust, the South England Conference has got this amazing counselling service. And they will not only talk about the usual counselling issues of trauma and so on, which they're brilliant at, but they will also support you spiritually, because they're all Christians, they're Adventists on this, and they will help you spiritually discover how you can overcome those addictions that may be besetting you. And the good news is that when we are willing to turn from our wicked ways, God gives a promise. He says, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. And your land may need healing, my friends. We all have lands that need healing, churches, communities that need healing. And then he says, now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to the prayer made in this place. If you'll give me just a couple more minutes, I'd like to tell you about why I'm going to Scotland during this annual leave. Is that, as you know, we've had a campaign here, and the overflow of that campaign is going to be enjoyed this afternoon. We're looking forward to Barak's baptism here. Feel free to come back at 4 o'clock and support him, and someone from Ricky from Luton North, and Sam from Stevenage, who will be baptized in this baptismal pool this afternoon. But what we are doing is we have been focusing on how we can reach and share this great news that we've got. And I've realized that this country, and indeed you, are Christians because of what Christians have done in the past to share this message. There was a time after the Romans left when Christianity had faded out and there was just paganism in this nation. And God kept a remnant of people, the Celtic Christians in Ireland, who hadn't been invaded and who kept the faith going. And they said, look, we've got that nation across the water from us that needs to be evangelized. And God sent people, missionaries, to set up a missions institute on Iona, on the far west coast of Scotland. And after a few years of that mission outpost starting to send out missionaries into Scotland and what we call Scotland now and Ireland, eventually, to cut a long story short, there was an invitation from the Kingdom of Northumbria, which is basically Northumberland as we know it, but a bit more than that. And the king said, please send a missionary. And one missionary went over and he came back to Iona and he said, oh, there are hard-hearted people over there in Northumberland. You know, no matter how much I preach to them, they will not be converted. And the people on Iona, the missionaries, the monastics, who had completely given their lives to the service of God, said, God has not given up on the Northumberland people. And Aidan, sometimes called St. Aidan, spoke to the people there and said, could it be that the way that this former missionary has preached has not won people's hearts because they need kindness and they need grace shown to them? And so they decided to send St. Aidan to walk the 300 miles from the west coast of Scotland to the east coast of northern England, to the headquarters of Northumberland, and he made a settlement on what is now called Holy Island, Lindisfarne. And from there, he evangelized the king and the Celts, and the Celtic Christianity was the primary source of faith in England in the 5th and 6th century and the 7th century, as eventually the Roman faith and the Roman missionaries came in with St. Augustine's and others from the south. But that's a long story. But what happened was that this Aidan, that I'd like to do some walking in the footsteps of, he, with kindness, transformed that nation. And one of the things that helped people to see what his true motives were was that he promised that everything he had was God's. Absolutely nothing that he owned was his own. One day, the King of Northumberland was really appreciative of what Aidan had been doing and the effectiveness of his ministry. And so King Aidan said, look, I've got a very fine horse. I'll give you this horse as a little thank you for what you have been doing. Because he'd noticed that Aidan always walked around, he was the top religious person and he was still walking barefoot through the country. And Aidan gratefully received that horse, got up on it because he could ride a horse, and he rode it out of the king's palace. And what did he do? The first beggar that he saw, he got off that fine horse and he gave it to the beggar. That would be the equivalent of one of us taking one of our brand new big super duper Ferraris or whatever, great cars that you've got, and giving it to one of the streetwalkers outside here. Can you imagine doing that? The king, when he heard about this, was so upset. How can you do that? What sort of appreciation do you really have for what I've given to you? And in the memorable words, Aidan stood his ground and he said, "Is the son of this mare, in other words, the son of a horse, more dear to you than that Son of God out there?" Let us pray. Father God, we're sorry for when we get all of our motives and attitudes mixed up. We like not to think of ourselves as being wicked, but our attitudes towards others is far from what your attitude is, Lord. Father, forgive us. And we come in honest prayer today, humbling ourselves and asking that you change us and that you do in us whatever we need to become the people that you are calling, to follow you, to be more like you, to seek your face, and through love and kindness to win the world to your great truth, your love and your grace. So bless us all in whatever area we do that. In Jesus' name, amen.